Hello, class. So in this lecture, and the title of this lecture is Democracy versus Republic or Democratic Republic, because as I've talked about in some other lectures and some other introductory videos, the United States chose a very distinctive hybrid form of government in what is called a democratic republic. And so as they were deciding what type of government to have, they had some choices. And one thing that's really, really important, and again, I've mentioned this in another video, is that the American Revolution and the creation of America as a country is the first country to come out of the Enlightenment. And that period of intellectual fermentation in Europe at the time, the Enlightenment, meant that these people were really, really concerned with these ideas and what would be the best form of government. How do we punish criminals? Things like this. And the Enlightenment is in many ways a continuation and an expansion of what we saw during the Renaissance. Well, what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance was going back to the ancient sources, Greek and Roman, and we saw this happening initially in Italy, but it flowered all throughout Europe and Northern Europe as well. So how do we have better governments? What is the best form of literature, philosophy, pretty much any intellectual area you can think of during the Renaissance and by extension during the Enlightenment? You had people who were going to these very important ancient texts and looking to see how had the Greeks decided on a form of government? How had the Romans decided on political philosophy? And so therefore it's not surprising that if we look at the two main choices, monarchy was out of the question. We were getting rid of a king. The Americans didn't want a king, although I did talk about how there was a faction who would have been happy to have had our own King George, that being George Washington. But monarchy was off the table. So we weren't going to have a monarchy. We weren't going to have a dictatorship either. And so the two main choices that we had to choose from were between democracy and republics. So what I plan to do in this video is to quickly go through those two different types of government, tracing the historical origins, and I'm not going to go into too much analytical detail here because that's what I want us to do in the class this week in the discussion forum where you're going to talk about democracies versus republics. All right, so Greek democracy, where does it start? It starts in Athens, as in many things did during this time. We had some other important Greek city-states known as polis or poli in the plural, which is where we get the word politics from. Polis meaning city. So in 507 BCE, the leader of Athens, Cleisthenes, decided that he was going to introduce a new form of government called rule by the people, or in Greek, demokratia. And this was revolutionary. And in fact, he decided to do this because the people who were composed of the middle class, not the elite that were known as the aristocrats, they were getting to be a little bit unruly, and Cleisthenes decided, okay, before things do turn ugly, I'm going to establish this new form of government known as what we call today democracy. And there were three main components of this new demokratia form of government, and three bodies. The first was the ecclesia, which was the governing body that wrote laws and directed foreign policy. Then you had the boule, also known as the Council of 500, and that was more of a representative body, like a legislature, that was composed of representatives from the 10 tribes of Athens. And the third was the dicasteria, or the courts, where citizens could go and argue cases before jurors. And the Greek historian Herodotus commented on this change and noted that there is first and most splendid of virtues, equality before the law. So here's where we get that idea that we certainly see enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and also in the U.S. Constitution, equality before the law. So the question that I want to raise for you is, even in this original form of democracy, is it democracy in the ways that we think of the term commonly today? And the answer is no. It's not pure democracy or what is known as direct democracy. So you had about 100,000 citizens in Athens around the 4th century BCE. And to be an Athenian citizen, both of your parents had to be Athenian citizens as well. Then there was a second class of what we called foreigners or resident foreigners who numbered about 10,000. The Greek philosopher Aristotle would have been in this second class. And then we also have about 150,000 slaves, which is something that oftentimes doesn't get talked about when we wax eloquently about the origins of democracy, because the fact is that it was, if it wasn't for the slaves, then we couldn't have had the type of democracy that we did have in ancient Athens. And to be a participant in this new democracy, you had to be a male citizen, 18 years or older, which shrinks the numbers down to about 40,000 Athenian males, who were then known as the demos, which is a Greek word for people. All right, but let's look at these three different institutions within Greek democracy. The ecclesia. So of those 40,000 people who were eligible to take part in these meetings of the ecclesia, only about 5,000 could take part in the meetings, because many people were serving in the military or they had other obligations. And the ecclesia met about 40 times a year. So it didn't meet continuously, but it did meet on a regular basis. And the ecclesia, as I mentioned, was the organization, the institution that took care of foreign policy for Athens, whether or not they needed to go to war. And this is where laws could be revised or new laws could be written. And this is also, the ecclesia was also the body where someone could be given the punishment of ostracism, which was a really harsh punishment in Athens, meaning that you would have to be exiled for up to 10 years from the city. Now, since they didn't meet regularly, the Greeks needed another body that would meet more on a regular basis, and that second body was the Boule, also known as the Council of 500. And why 500? Because it took 50 people, 50 members from each of the 10 original Athenian tribes, and they did meet on a daily basis. And that was the organization, that was the body that was most responsible for the daily running of government and politics in Athens at the time. They took care of military resources, concerns with workers, and also hosting foreign visitors and ambassadors, and also deciding what was important enough to go before the ecclesia. Selection was by lot, and the reason they did this rather than have an election is because they felt it was more random, but secondly, because they didn't want to have a permanent class of people who would try to better their own lives and might want to become what we would call today career politicians. And then the third institution was the dicasteria, and this was the popular court system. If you have ever heard about or perhaps read some of the dialogues of Plato, including the trial and death of Socrates, this is where Socrates went to make his case. And you, about 500 men were chosen daily by lot. You had to be 30 years or older. The idea being that the older you were, the more mature and reasoned you could be in your judgment. And the jurors did earn a wage, but it wasn't a great wage, and so mostly it was retirees who were able to serve as jurors. However, the dicasteria had a lot of authority and power because there wasn't an Athenian police force, and so there were also not any really clear parameters regarding what types of cases could be heard before the dicasteria. So they really had a huge influence on sort of shaping that policy. Now, you can see that there are going to be, if you think about the American system of government, you can think about the spirit of the laws from Montesquieu talking about checks and balances, you will see that certainly some of what we saw with the ancient Athenians does make its way into the American government, but not all of it. So, what else? Well, the Roman Republic. Almost simultaneous with the establishment of democracy in Athens, we have the legendary overthrowing of the Tarquin kings in ancient Rome. And these kings that were Etruscans, not even Romans, had been ruling Rome for quite a while, and they were overthrown, and instead of a monarchy, the Romans established a republic. And a republic is characterized by the election of representatives who rule on behalf of the citizens who are voting for these representatives. So it's not me having a direct say in the government, it's me electing someone and trusting that that elected representative is going to truly represent my views as well as the views of other voters. But you can imagine how difficult that can be, because what if you have some of your constituents who feel one way on a certain issue, but you also have constituents that feel a different way on a certain issue, and that is why even still today, electoral politics can be so tricky. All right. Romans also had certain rules regarding citizenship. To be a citizen, you had to be over 15 years of age. You also had to be a male, and you had to be descended from the original Roman tribes. So quite a few similarities to what we see happening in Greece. And one way to distinguish citizens was that citizens wore togas. And if you were not a citizen, you were not allowed to wear a toga. And the emperor typically, once you get to the Roman Empire, wore a purple toga to signify that he was not just an average citizen, but he was the princeps or first citizen. Togas was a sign, a class sign, not just something that was cool to wear. All right, now, a full citizen could vote, a full citizen could marry other freeborn people, and a full citizen could conduct commerce. Now, other citizens, there were different classes of citizens, had some of these rights, but not all of them. Overall, Roman culture was characterized by two main classes. You had the patricians, who were the elite, the wealthy elite, and also we would call them aristocrats today. And then you had the plebeians, who were the lower class citizens and workers. And the main legislative body in Rome during the Republic was the Senate. Now, the Senate had existed prior to the foundation of the Republic, but once the monarchy had been tossed out, then the Senate became even more powerful. And only patricians could serve in the Senate. And from the patrician Senate were elected two consuls who served as the leaders of Rome. And if you were a plebeian, you were kind of out of luck. You really didn't have representation at this time, and the Senate could pretty much ignore you. And if you were a woman, you also didn't really have much voice, because women are not allowed to vote, even if they had been patrician born. Now, over time, in part because of some of the same things that led Cleisthenes in Greece to establish democracy, the patrician leaders of Rome realized, we're outnumbered by these plebeians, so we probably need to at least throw them a bone here or there. And that's exactly what they did. Over time, the plebeians were given their own legislative assembly. Over time, they were allowed to elect what were known as tribunes, who were similar in their work duties to the consuls. And in fact, the tribunes had veto power over laws that were passed by the Senate. So there was some back and forth going on there as well. The size of the Roman Senate changed over time. When it was originally established, it was 100 members, and during the time prior to the Republic, that increased to a number of 300 members of the Roman Senate. In 82 BCE, the dictator Sulla doubled the size of the Senate, and he actually purged many senators as well. So now we had a Senate that was 600 members, and Sulla also allowed for non-patricians to become senators. Fast forward about 100 years or so, and we have Julius Caesar, who is increasing the Senate to a size of 900, and however, this did not stay, and once Caesar was assassinated on the floor of the Senate, then the number of senators decreased once again. Now, why was Caesar killed? Well, this isn't an ancient history class or a world history class, but it's relevant, so I will talk about this briefly. Caesar was what we call a dictator, but we have a popular conception of dictatorship. In Rome, it had a very specific function. A dictator was someone who was appointed, and it was a formal position within Roman society. And oftentimes, the dictator would be appointed during times of war. And the idea was that we need somebody who can take care of business, who can be a military leader, but also make all the decisions. And we, as the Senate, are just going to kind of stand back. And the dictator had full, total power. Now, you remember in week 1, we talked about totalitarianism. That's kind of what's going on here. The dictator had basically totalitarian powers and controlled all elements of society. And you can imagine that this could create some real tension. However, there had been a precedent set where one of the first dictators appointed by Rome was a man named Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus, almost as soon as he defeated the enemies of Rome, he resigned his dictatorship and went back to being a farmer. And so it was kind of assumed that other dictators would follow that same course that had been set by Cincinnatus. Not all of them did, and the death of Julius Caesar occurred because people were worried that he was not going to renounce his dictatorship. Okay. What other important innovation do we think of when we think of Roman culture and society? In terms of politics and government, we would think of the laws. The Romans also believed in equality under the law, and in 449 BCE, they established one of the first set of Roman laws and one of the first actual legal bodies of law, and they were known as the 12 Tables. And so even in the time of the first century of the Common Era, when the Christian apostle Paul found himself in trouble, he had been a Roman citizen, and so he actually asked for his day in court. And as a Roman citizen, like any Roman citizen, he was given that. Now, once we get to the empire under Octavian, also known as Augustus, the Senate really becomes nothing but ceremonial, and the true power lies in the hands of the Roman emperor. Well, there you go. So again, think about how both the Greek style of democracy and the Roman Republican form of government, what was distinctive about them, what did they have similarities with, and how perhaps both the positive and the negatives would have influenced what the American founders were going to do when they sat down to initially revise the Articles of Confederation, but ended up coming up with an entirely new document and really a much different form of government related to what we'd had previously, but much more powerful in many ways. All right, students, that's what I have for today. Thanks. Talk to you soon. Bye.